My son-in-law grabbed the microphone out of the band's hand in the middle of my 70th birthday party, pointed at me in front of 200 guests, and told everyone in that room that I was a selfish old man who needed to be put in his place. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I picked up my glass of bourbon, took one slow sip, and I smiled. That smile. He would not understand it until 3 weeks later. Let me take you back to where this started. Because it did not begin at that party. It never begins at the moment you think it does. It begins years earlier, in the small choices you make, the things you let slide. The voice in the back of your head that you keep telling yourself to ignore. My wife passed away 6 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought it for 2 years, and she fought it the way she did everything with grace and stubbornness and a sense of humor that made the nurses on her floor genuinely look forward to their shifts. Her name was Patricia. Everyone called her Patty. I still call her Patty when I talk to her photograph every morning before coffee. That is between me and her. We had one daughter together. She was the best of both of us. Patty's warmth, my work ethic, her laugh, my stubbornness. When she was in college, she called me every Sunday without fail. When Patty got sick, my daughter drove 4 hours every weekend to sit with her mother. I watched her hold her mother's hand through things no child should have to see. And I thought to myself, we did something right. We raised someone real. Then she met her husband. I want to be fair. In the beginning, I genuinely liked him. He was charming, well-dressed, knew how to talk to older people. He looked me in the eye when he shook my hand, and he asked questions about my work. I spent 35 years as an architect, built a firm from nothing, sold it 8 years before I retired for enough money that my family would never worry. He seemed impressed by that, and at the time I took it for admiration. I understand now it was calculation. They got married 4 years ago. I paid for the wedding. Not because anyone asked me to, but because Patty was gone and I wanted to give my daughter the day her mother would have planned for her. I rented a venue on the water in Charleston. $300,000. I did not blink. It was Patty's money too, and I knew exactly what Patty would have wanted to do with it. 6 months after the wedding, my son-in-law lost his job. He worked in commercial real estate and, the way he explained it, the market shifted and his firm downsized. I believed him. I told them not to worry. I told them, family takes care of family. I set up a monthly allowance enough to cover their mortgage, their car payments, groceries, utilities. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary lasted 3 years. During those 3 years, my son-in-law did not find another full-time position. What he did do was develop a taste for things. Golf club memberships, a truck that cost as much as my first house, a fishing boat he used 4 times, weekend trips to Scottsdale. I kept thinking he would find his footing. My daughter kept telling me he had several promising leads. The leads never materialized into anything, but more expenses. I should have seen it. I want to be honest about that, because the comments on videos like this always split between people who are outraged at the villain and people who point the finger at the narrator and say, "You created this." They are both right. I set the table for what happened. I just did not expect what they served. I own a lake house in the mountains of North Carolina. Patty and I built it 22 years ago. I designed it myself, every room, every window placement, every detail of the wraparound porch. We spent every summer there until she got sick. After she passed, I started going alone. Just me, and the quiet, and the water, and the feeling that she was still somehow in the walls of the place. That house is not just an asset to me. It is the last place I felt like myself. About a year ago, my son-in-law started making comments, casual at first. Things like, "What are you going to do with that place when you can't make the drive anymore?" And, "Have you thought about what happens to your properties in your estate plan?" I answered carefully. I told him I had an attorney and everything was handled. He would nod and let it go, and I would tell myself it was just curiosity. Then 2 months before my birthday, he sat down with me at my kitchen table and he laid it out plainly. He wanted me to transfer the lake house into a joint family LLC with him and my daughter as co-managers. He had a whole presentation, printed slides. He walked me through tax advantages and estate planning benefits and long-term asset protection. He talked for 40 minutes. He was smooth. I have to give him that. I told him I would think about it. I did not tell him that within 24 hours of that conversation, I had called my attorney, a man I have known for 27 years, and asked him to review every financial arrangement I had involving my daughter and her husband. I did not tell him I had also called my accountant. I did not tell him that what I found over the following 2 weeks made my stomach turn in a way I had not felt since I sat in a hospital room and watched a doctor tell my wife her scan results. The allowance I had been sending every month had not been going to their mortgage for over a year. The house was 2 months behind. The car payments were current because the cars were more visible than the house. My son-in-law had been taking the money, moving it through a personal account, and investing it in speculative positions that had largely failed. My daughter either did not know or did not want to know. I have spent a long time trying to figure out which one it was. I still do not have a clean answer. My 70th birthday was my daughter's idea. She planned it for months, or at least she told me she was planning it. I found out later that my son-in-law had taken over most of the decisions about the venue and the guest list and the catering. He invited people I barely knew and removed people I had known for decades. I did not notice until the night itself, when I looked around the room and realized I was surrounded largely by his contacts. The party was held at a rented hall outside Asheville. I wore the blue blazer Patty had picked out for me years ago for a firm anniversary dinner. I sat at the head table with my daughter on my left and an empty chair on my right, which my son-in-law had left for himself and kept abandoning to work the room. The evening started well enough. Old colleagues found me. My doctor, who has been a friend for 20 years, sat with me for an hour. My brother flew in from Portland, and we shared a bottle of wine and talked about our father. For a while, I forgot everything I had found out. For a while, it was just a birthday. Dinner had just been cleared when the band took a short break. The room was warm with conversation and wine, and the specific looseness that comes with 2 hours of open bar. I was listening to my brother tell a story when I noticed my son-in-law making his way toward the small stage near the front of the room. I watched him take the microphone from the stand. The band's lead singer looked confused and then smiled politely the way professionals do when they decide it is not their problem. My son-in-law tapped the mic. The room started to quiet. He started with a toast. That is the part people do not talk about when they tell this story afterward. He started warm. He said nice things about me, my career, my devotion to my wife during her illness, the sacrifices I had made. People nodded. A few poof wiped their eyes. My daughter was smiling at me from my left, and I was starting to think I had misjudged everything, that maybe tonight was just a night and the other thing could be handled quietly and separately like grown adults. Then he shifted. He said the word but. That one word, but. He said that as I got older, I had started making decisions that concerned the whole family, not just myself. He said that a man of my age, living alone, holding on to assets that could be better managed by people who were younger and more active, was something that needed to be addressed. He used the phrase legacy planning. He used the phrase best interests of everyone involved. He said that tonight felt like the right time, in front of people who loved me, to have an honest conversation about the future. Then he looked directly at me, and he said that he and my daughter needed me to commit tonight, in front of these people, to beginning the transfer of the lake house into the family LLC. The room went silent in the way rooms go silent when everyone understands something has just gone very wrong. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at the table. Her hands were folded in her lap. She did not look at me. I stood up slowly. My knees are not what they used to be, and I take my time getting to my feet. I walked toward the stage. I could hear my own shoes on the floor in that silence. My son-in-law held the microphone, and watched me come toward him with an expression I recognized, the expression of a man who believes he has already won because he has made it too awkward for anyone to refuse. I stopped in front of him. I held out my hand for the microphone. He hesitated for just a moment, then gave it to me with a small smile. I turned to the room. 200 people looking at me. I said, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to thank my son-in-law for his kind words." I paused. All of them. Another pause. "I'm going to step outside for some air. Please enjoy the bar. The band will be back in 10 minutes. I set the microphone back in the stand, and I walked to the side door that opened onto the parking lot. My son-in-law followed me. Of course he did. Outside it was cool, the mountains dark against a sky full of stars. He came up beside me, and before I could say anything, he said, "I had to do it this way. You weren't going to do it any other way." His voice was steady, certain, like a man completing a business transaction. I said, "You're right. I wasn't." He nodded, as if that settled something. I took my phone out of my jacket pocket. I made a call. He watched me do it. He did not look concerned. He probably assumed I was calling my attorney to make a complaint, or calling someone to vent. He stood there, with his arms crossed, and waited. I told the person on the other end that it was time. I said, "Go ahead." I said, "Thank you," and hung up. My son-in-law said, "What was that?" I said, "You'll see." I went back inside. He followed me. The band was starting back up. My brother found me and handed me a drink and put his arm around my shoulder and did not ask me anything, which is one of the things I have always loved about my brother. My daughter came to me and tried to say something, and I held up one hand, gently, and I said, "Not tonight." She stopped. 25 minutes later, the side door of the hall opened. A woman walked in. She was in her early 40s, professional, carrying a leather document folio. She had the specific posture of someone who has delivered news in rooms like this before. She found my son-in-law first because he was not difficult to find. He was standing near the bar, drink in hand, watching the room with the satisfaction of a man who believes the night has gone his way. She introduced herself. She was a paralegal from my attorney's office. She handed him an envelope. Inside that envelope was a formal notice that the monthly financial support arrangement had been terminated, effective immediately. Inside that envelope was a notice that the joint account I shared with my daughter, one I had maintained for emergencies, had been closed. Inside that envelope was a letter informing him that any further discussion of the transfer of any real property I owned should be directed to my attorney, and that I would not be participating in those conversations personally. There was also a one-page summary of what my own investigation had found regarding the misuse of funds over the preceding 14 months. My son-in-law read it standing at the bar. I watched his face change. The satisfaction drained out first. Then, the color. He looked up and found me across the room, and I was already looking at him. I did not smile this time. My brother asked me what had just happened, and I told him everything right there at the table, quietly, while the band played and the remaining guests danced. He listened without interrupting, which took some effort on his part. He has never been a quiet man. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dad would have done the same thing." 4. I thought about that for a long time after. The weeks that followed were not clean or easy. I want to be honest about that too, because these stories sometimes get told as if the resolution arrives like a thunderclap, and everything after it is silence. It was not silence. My daughter called me every day for the first 2 weeks. Some of those calls were tearful, and some were angry, and some were both at the same time. I picked up every call. I listened. I said very little. What I did not do was reverse anything. My son-in-law hired an attorney of his own. There were a few letters exchanged. My attorney handled all of it. There was nothing he could do. The accounts were mine. The property was mine. The arrangement had been informal and voluntary. He had no legal claim to anything. He had only ever had my generosity, and generosity is not a contract. About 3 weeks after the party, my daughter came to see me alone. She drove up on a Tuesday morning, and I saw her car in the driveway, and I made coffee before she knocked. We sat on the back porch and looked at the yard, and she did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "I knew he was going to do something at the party. I didn't know it was going to be that." And quote, I said, "What did you think it was going to be?" She said, "A toast, a nice speech, something that would make you feel like you wanted to help us." I said, "Did you know about the money?" A long pause. A very long pause. A pause long enough to answer the question before she did. She said, "I knew things weren't what you thought." I did not say anything. I let it sit there. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I have thought about what I felt in that moment more than I have thought about almost anything in recent years." It was not anger. The anger had burned through weeks before and left something quieter behind it. What I felt sitting on that porch was grief. Not grief like when Patty died, nothing will ever be that, but a smaller grief. The grief of understanding that something you believed about a person was not entirely true, and that you have to decide what to do with the version of them that actually exists. I told my daughter that I loved her. I told her that would not change. I told her that what happened with the money and the accounts and the property was between me and her husband, and that I would not hold it against her if she was willing to be honest with me going forward. I told her that if she needed help, real help, she could come to me directly, always, but I told her that I would not fund a life I had not agreed to fund, and I would not be managed or maneuvered out of what I had spent my life building. She nodded. She cried a little. I handed her a napkin. Then she said something I did not expect. She said, "I've been thinking about going back to work." Before they were married, my daughter had worked in interior design. She was good at it. She has an eye for space and proportion that I always thought came from growing up watching me draw. She had stopped working when she got married because her husband had preferred it that way. That had always bothered me in a way I had never said out loud. I told her that was the best idea I had heard in a long time. There is a version of this story where my son-in-law and I eventually reach some kind of truce, where things soften over years and holidays become manageable again. I do not know if that version is the one I am living. I am not owed a neat ending, and I know that. What I do know is this: the lake house is still mine. Every window I placed, every board on that porch. Every morning I have sat in the chair by the water and talked out loud to Patty about nothing in particular. All of it is still mine. Nobody stood at a microphone and took any of that from me. All they did was show me clearly what I needed to see. My attorney suggested I also consult with a financial advisor about restructuring my estate plan in a way that would make future conversations like the one at my birthday unnecessary. I did. It took about a month. Everything is clean now, documented, legally protected, clear in its instructions. My daughter knows what is in it. Her husband does not. I also, at my attorney's recommendation, reported the misuse of funds to law enforcement. That process is ongoing, and I will not speak to the details of it here. But I want people to know that when someone harms you financially, when someone takes what they were given in trust and redirects it for their own purposes, there are consequences beyond the personal. There are legal ones. Do not let anyone tell you there are not. My 70th birthday was a strange night. I have had stranger, but there is one moment from it that I keep coming back to, not the microphone, not the parking lot, not the paralegal walking through that side door. It is the moment before all of it, when I was sitting with my brother and an old colleague and my doctor, and the band was playing something from the 60s, and for about 45 minutes, I was simply a man at his own birthday party, among people who knew him when he was young, and knew the woman he had married, and knew the kind of work he had done, and loved him, the way you love people who have simply been there, through everything, without agenda. That is what I was protecting. Not the house, not the accounts. That, Patty would have seen through my son-in-law in the first 5 minutes. She always had a talent for that, reading people, cutting through the surface to what was actually underneath. She would have taken me by the arm at some point in year 1 and said, quietly, so only I could hear, "Watch that one." I would have said I was sure he was fine. She would have given me a look that said, "We both know you're wrong, and this conversation is over." I miss that look more than I can say. On the drive home from the party, alone in my car with the mountains dark on either side and the road empty, I thought about her. I thought about everything she had worked for alongside me. Every long hour, every difficult year, every decision we had made together about how to live and what to protect and what to let go. I thought about what it would mean to hand any of that over because someone had embarrassed me at a party and called it love. I thought about the look she would have given me if I had. And I drove home, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat in the chair on my back porch, and looked at the dark yard and the sky. And I said out loud to nobody and to her, I kept it. The glass was cold in my hand. The night was quiet. Somewhere down the hill, a creek moved through the dark. If you are sitting somewhere right now watching this, and someone in your life has been slowly repositioning themselves between you and everything you built, I am not here to tell you what to do. You know your situation better than I do, but I will tell you what I know, from where I am standing now, on the other side of it. You do not owe anyone the fruit of your life's work simply because they want it. Generosity given freely is a gift. Generosity demanded is a transaction, and you did not agree to those terms. Document everything. Talk to an attorney before you think you need one, and pay attention to the people who only find you interesting when they are thinking about what you have. The rest, the grief, the hard conversations, the long, quiet nights after you carry that. There is no way around it. But you carry it upright. That much you can choose. I turned 70 in that blue blazer with my brother's arm around my shoulder and 200 people in a room. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, I was alone in the way you are alone when you are the only one in the room who knows exactly what is about to happen. I have been alone in harder rooms than that. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? If the person standing at that microphone was someone you had loved and trusted and supported for years, someone connected to the child you raised, could you have made that phone call? Could you have walked back into that room and sat down and waited? I would like to know. I think about it sometimes. Whether there was another way through it. Some conversation I could have had 6 months earlier that would have made all of this unnecessary. And then I think about my daughter on that Tuesday morning, saying she wanted to go back to work, and I think maybe the only way through some things is all the way through them. The lake house is quiet this time of year. The water is still. Some mornings I make coffee and I sit on the porch, and I do not think about any of it. I just watch the light come up over the water, and I am grateful, in the plain, ordinary way, for what I have and what I kept. That is enough. That has always been enough.